Welcome back for part two. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and close our Android device. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. And let's go ahead and go to our main activity. And I'm going to switch this to my text. Now, up to this point, we've basically been working inside of the actual coding aspect of it. And I actually prefer to work in this environment, but some students have asked that I show you guys how to use the design as well. So I can actually go to the design feature here. And actually, let me go in here and delete this, because I don't want that in there. So now that I've got this, I can actually click right here inside the frame. I've got my linear layout. I've got the information I can do. What I want to do is let me set my orientation to vertical. That way I can get nice things orderly. For this event, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add a couple items. So I'm going to go into my text. I'm going to add a text view first. That text view, I'm going to go ahead and just wrap content. Okay, and then, oops. Sorry about that. And then I'm not really worried about the text view as far as the ID. But here what we're going to put in is just name. Underneath that, I'm going to add some plain text because I want to be able to add information. Again, wrap content. And then text, we don't need to put anything in there. Here I'm going to go ahead and give it a name for the ID. We'll just call it ET name. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that even though you are working with a graphical user interface, always go back in here and make sure that the information shows up. Because what you'll find is that once in a while, the editor does not add the ID information or may mess up on something. This is why it was important that you guys got to play with the user interface and get into the actual programming versus right into using the GUI. That way, if there is a problem, you're able to solve it quickly. I'm going to go back to my design. We're going to go and grab another text, change this, and this time we're going to put country. Add some more plain text. Again, let's go and erase this. We'll call this ET country. And then last but not least, we're going to need to add a button because we want to be able to click on this. And when we click on the button, we want to go ahead and add the information to our database. So go and go to buttons. And then from here, let's go change the text. So we're going to just call this insert. And we'll call this BTN insert. Again, just go back in, make sure you got your text. Make sure you got your ID here. Everything looks good so far. So now let's go and go back to the database. So inside of the database, we're going to need to add an SQL query that's going to be able to add the information to the database itself. So let's go ahead and start off with a simple one. We're going to start with public Boolean, and I'll explain why we use Boolean in a little bit. Insert data. Inside here, what we're going to do is call our database. We're going to open a connection to that, so we're going to get to the writable. Next, what we're going to do is open a connection to the database. So let's go and do that. SQL. And we're going to refer to this dot get writable. Next, what we're going to do is open the content values. And we're going to create a new object of it. Now that we have the content values, now what we can do is we're going to be able to grab this information and then we're going to insert it into the database. And so what information do we want to gather from our user? Well, that's pretty easy. In this situation, we want to get a name, and then the other one was the country. So that's what we're passing into the method itself. So now we can do content values dot. We're going to use the term put because we're going to put the information into the database. We're going to identify the key itself. And the key in this one is the column name, comma, and then what data are we gathering? In this case, it's just the information we're passing in, which is name. Go and do the same thing again for country. Once you've done that, then what we're going to do is we can do the situation of just database dot. And here we're doing an insert. We need to get the table name. Passing in null. And then we're going to pass in the values that we've gathered from the user. Now, in most situations, if you just want to passing information in and you're not really worried about checking, you could do it this way. But in our case, what we want to always do is make sure that the data gets there without any issues at all. So here we're going to assign it as a long, and let's do result is equal to. Because what this is going to do for us is if we get this and it comes out where our result is anything but -1, that means it passed it in. Otherwise, it returned a false value or it did not work. So if result is equal to -1, we can say that we're going to return false. And this is why we're using the Boolean. Else, we're going to return 2. As you can see here, so far so good. Now what we need to do is go to our main activity. Because we've got a little work to do here. So far we don't have any widgets or anything like that, so we're going to import Android dot widget. And in this case, we've got buttons. And again, import dot widget. We have edit text. Now let's go and set our global variables like we've done before. Edit text. Our first one, if you don't remember what we called it, go ahead and go back to your, go ahead and go back to your XML. We have ET name. Edit text. Our other one, just to make sure everything got created correctly. ET country and our button. Now, let's go ahead and add them inside of here on our onCreate. ET name equals. Let's assign them to our activity main. So we have to find activity by ID, r.id dot ET name. Do the same thing again for country. And last but not least, let's go ahead and take care of our button. I'm going to put a little space in between here, and the reason why is because we're going to continue to add information as we go on. So I kind of like to keep things a little bit separated. Okay. So now we've got these three items added into our user interface. Now, let's go ahead and get to our next method that we're going to add to this. Now in this situation here, we're going to go and add data. But how are we going to add the data, or what's the expectation? Well, you have a button there, so we're going to click on the button when we want to insert. So if your mindset is that we need to create an action listener, then you are correct. So let's go into btn insert dot on set on click. Oops. Set on click listener. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put new and then view.onClickListener. Now let's go ahead and add a Boolean because we want to check if something was inserted. Is inserted is equal to our database handler dot insert data. And this is where we're going to call that method from before. So we're going to pass in ET name dot get text dot toString. Follow that up with ET country dot get text dot toString. Now, if this is true and we get back a Boolean statement saying, yes, it is working, then we want to go ahead and put a message out to Toast. So if it's equal to true, then our Toast dot make text main activity dot this. And then in parentheses, we're going to put in data was inserted. And then let's go ahead and set the length of time. So toast dot long dot show. And now I'm going to kind of cheat. I'm going to go ahead and copy this message. And then I'm going to paste this in my else statement. Because if it did not return a true value, then I'm going to say my data was not inserted. And actually, let's just make this capitals. That way it's very clear that it was not inserted. Now, the important thing to remember is that when you do this with an on-click listener, is that you're going to need to make sure that your onCreate recognizes that it exists. And what that means is that you have to go up to your onCreate method, and then you need to add that method inside of here. Okay. Now that this is done, if we go ahead and run this, we should be able to into our table. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and say Steve and country US. If I click insert, data is inserted. So how can we verify that this was done? Well, that's real easy. Remember how we had gone up to our view, Windows, and then when underneath our Device Explorer, if we go under our data, again, type in the project name, database activity, databases, what we can actually do is get the location. We can actually get the location of where the database is being stored. And so I'm going to just copy that information. And since I'm on a Mac, it's a little bit different for you guys. I'm going to go to my folder and say OK. And it's going to bring me up where my database is located. Now, if I open this up, I actually have a tool on my system. It's called Database Browser for SQLite. You can download it. It's a free app. It's not a big deal. But if I go under here, I can see that my ID, my name, and my country was created. If I go to Browse Data and switch this to User Data, I can see that I have one record in there. There's my key, or my ID is 1, name, country. So it did put the information into the database correctly. In the next video, what I'm going to show you is how to display all the data in the table.